Welcome, everyone. We've come together today to honor and celebrate the life, work, spirit, and memory of our friend, partner, mentor, and colleague, Michael Toms. We'll be hearing from several people who appeared early and often on New Dimensions and who otherwise contributed greatly to the sensibility of the program. We'll also hear from Justine Toms, Michael's life partner, who, of course, co-founded New Dimensions Radio with him 40 years ago. And we'll reflect on the vast riches that their inspiration to create this wonderful vehicle has brought and continues to bring into all our lives. My name is Phil Catalfo, and I worked with Michael and Justine and a host of others in what we called the New Dimensions family from 1977 to 1989. I started out as a recording engineer, but before long, in the way that New Dimensions has of encouraging us to achieve our full potential, I was put in charge of building the broadcast network. I remember Michael coming back from a conference, producers conference of some sort, and telling us about the public radio satellite system that NPR was building, which would interconnect several hundred public stations and also be open to offerings from independent producers like New Dimensions Radio. "We're going to put New Dimensions on the satellite," he said. And turning to me, he said, "And you get to do it." At least that's my memory of it, and my recollection certainly captures one essential quality of Michael's that I will always associate with him: his unrestrained optimism, his belief that anything was possible if your intention and focus were sufficient, and that the primary obstacle to achieving even very ambitious goals was our belief that we couldn't do it. That, of course, has always been a paramount theme of the conversations heard on New Dimensions. But Michael really lived and breathed by those words. And it's in large measure because of his steadfast belief in that principle that New Dimensions Radio has not only endured, but all these years later, grown to reach not just a national audience, but a global one. For the rest of my time at New Dimensions Radio, I was the director of broadcasting, a title I made up for myself with Michael's encouragement. I also continued engineering programs for most of that time and wrote grant proposals, and for a while did the desktop publishing of the bi-monthly newsletter. We always wore many hats, as Justine always said. But what really stands out about my work with the affiliates, thinking back on it, was that a role that I didn't seek and wasn't sure I was capable of became a kind of calling for me, an opportunity for me to schmooze and evangelize and put myself on the line for what we were trying to accomplish, which was really nothing less than social and personal transformation. And that I loved doing it. And this, too, of course, was part and parcel of what the program itself has always been about. One of the many pithy sayings that Michael was fond of offering to anyone within earshot was not only a guiding light for me in that work, but has remained a linchpin in the work I've done since my New Dimensions days. Michael had an extensive background in advertising and copywriting and marketing, and in the early years after leaving the corporate world, he led seminars teaching nonprofits how to apply the principles that he had mastered in his commercial career to further their nonprofit ends. He distilled these down to one simple statement: marketing is the philosophical alternative to force. He always said this with a twinkle in his eye, and he always waited a beat or two for the other person to fully get it, and he always produced the aha that he sought. His point, I eventually realized, was not only that the principles of modern marketing can be applied to non-commercial endeavors, it was that communication is preferable to violence. Which, wouldn't it be nice if more of us operated from that knowledge? But there are so many things I learned during my years in New Dimensions Radio, things that Michael and Justine taught me, things I heard in the radio interviews, things I deduced from the work I did. And they're all things that have stayed with me for almost 25 years since my journey took me into other work and other life experiences. But most particularly in my work as a writer and an editor, and in conducting many interviews myself, although I admit less than 3,000 of them. Feel free to chuckle at that. I learned to listen, and I also learned to speak my truth, or at least I learned that it was important to try to do that. I learned that the person I'm speaking with is not my adversary, but my partner. I learned that the journey is the destination, And I learned that, as J. Krishnamurti said, truth is a pathless land, and that each of us must find our own path to our own truth. I also learned that life sometimes brings us challenges or difficulties that don't fit neatly into our belief that, as the saying goes, you create your own reality. At one such time in my life, almost 20 years ago, Michael gave me a piece of advice that I've never forgotten. I was going through an especially excruciating passage in the long ordeal of my son's illness, and I was in a state of profound anguish. It happened that I was speaking with Michael on the phone, and he said to me, "Go into the pain. That's how you'll redeem it." I thought for a second, and I said to him, "I hear what you're saying, and I know you're right, and at the same time, I know why they call it pain and suffering." But I kept his advice close, and it turned out he was right. By heeding his simple advice, I was able to keep from running from the pain, from seeking to numb myself or absent myself. And so I was able to be present with my son, with my other children, with my wife, and with myself and my own sorrow. And in that way, I was able to learn, and I'm still learning, what that severe trial was meant to teach me. I was able to redeem it. I've often thought it was the most profound thing Michael ever said to me, and perhaps anyone ever said to me. And many times over the years, I found myself in a position to share the gift of that advice with others. And because life offers us gifts at the most unexpected times, I had the gift of being able to return that advice to Michael and to Justine a few months ago when his health took a sharp turn for the worse. And I knew that they were going through similarly narrow straits. So I want to thank Michael and Justine in the way that New Dimensions listeners have always expressed their gratitude for the teachings they've encountered on the radio program, but also in the way of one who learned up close from their examples how to engage with the perplexing, rapturous, limitless mystery that we find ourselves in the middle of, and how to make some kind of sense of it, both the joyous parts and the hellacious parts, the random beauty and the redeemable pain. Thanks for encouraging me to include it all. Thanks for reminding me that, as Justine has so often said, no matter how bad it gets, you can't fall out of the universe. And thanks especially for proving that merging your vocation and your avocation, as Michael often described the work that he and Justine created, is a wise and walkable path. I want to briefly share a couple of things that people have said to me in the last month or so as they've learned about Michael's passing in appreciation of his life and work. Richard Henley was living in Salt Lake City in the mid-1980s when he contacted us about getting New Dimensions on the community station there at KRCL. When the station agreed to air the series, he would walk a couple of miles at 3 in the morning every Sunday in order to air the program on the station at 6 in the morning. So he recently said, "The New Dimensions radio interviews by Michael Toms were the best gift I could have had at that time in my life, so I thought it was equally important to assist in their initial airings in Salt Lake City." And I think Richard speaks for countless listeners over the years when he says, "I'm quite certain that without those early 1980s New Dimensions programs, my life would have turned out much differently than it has, and I would have missed the opportunities I was born to experience." David Freuberg is an independent radio producer, the host and creator of the acclaimed series Kindred Spirits and later Humankind. Michael and I met him many times at conferences and always felt a close affinity for him and his work. And he recently said this to me in an email. "Michael was truly an emblem of that late 60s, early 70s era when we suddenly felt free to explore ancient but hidden truths, which were somehow packaged as New Age but were in fact age-old. He strove for decades to make that accessible to a wide audience and undoubtedly helped many hundreds of thousands on their path. He was also an unlikely role model for me in many ways, and I take some of his lessons with me daily. I will miss him." And the Bay Area's own Wes Scoop-Nisker, who for decades has been admonishing his listeners, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own, said simply of Michael, "He put out a lot of good vibes into the world." And so he did. And now let's hear from Michael himself.
Hello, this is Michael Toms of the New Dimensions Broadcasting Network. host and executive producer of New Dimensions. The New Dimensions Broadcasting Network brings together the voices and visions of those at the forefront of change and uses the tools of the media wisely and ethically to take an active role in addressing the most important questions of our time. New Dimensions programming presents a diversity of views from many traditions and cultures, fostering the process of living a more healthy life while deepening our connections to self, family, community, nature, and the planet. The following selections highlight some of our most exciting and innovative programming. Enjoy. The New Dimensions weekly radio series is broadcast on more than 600 radio stations throughout the United States, Canada, and Australia, as well as shortwave radio throughout the world. This weekly series is also available on the internet and via satellite on the U.S. Armed Forces Radio Network. These programs feature some of the world's leading thinkers, scientists, creative artists, social innovators, and spiritual teachers. People such as Dee Hock, founder of Visa International, and a pioneer in the implementation of chaotic principles in organization design.
I sense now that people are at a stage where they...
Welcome to the Pioneers, revolution from the heart of nature.
Concern with the environment will no longer be one...
Welcome to the power of nonviolence, compassion in action.
Hatred makes you so ugly, and you do not want to go through this beautiful world looking ugly. You want to go through this beautiful world holding up your shining face.
Hello, this is Michael Toms. In June of 1994, my partner Justine and I traveled to London to interview Sir Lawrence Vanderpost in his home. We spent several hours with Sir Lawrence over a 2-day period and recorded a series of remarkable dialogues, which we now bring to you in 3 parts. Welcome to Deep Ecology for the 21st Century.
We have been totally overridden by a preoccupation with the economy, and this appears to me to be suicidal. I've said many times that I feel as if the whole world is riding on a giant car and we're heading at a brick wall at 100 miles an hour, and everybody in the car is arguing about where they want to sit. It doesn't matter who's driving. Someone, for God's sake, has got to say, we're heading at a brick wall, put on the brakes and turn the wheel. Unfortunately, the people who are saying that are locked in the trunk.
I am convinced that if people look for the good, they will find it, and that in countless ways this will have constructive consequences. Enthusiasm breeds effort and success. These are the words of Sir John Templeton, best known for his work in the financial world as the founder of the Templeton Funds, as well as the creator of the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion, the world's largest philanthropic monetary award. We're pleased to present the series Laws of Life with Sir John Templeton. The wisdom... As part of our continuing commitment to meet the challenge of preserving and restoring the planetary ecosystem, honoring cultural diversity, and educating people to methods and systems of sustainability, we offer Mariposa Monarcha, the life and teachings of the monarch butterfly. This series gathers voices from the 3 nations that share the migratory path of the monarch butterfly and demonstrates how science, culture, economics, agriculture, tourism, and ecology interrelate through the exquisite phenomenon of the monarch butterfly. In September 1999, 40 innovative thinkers from around the world gathered together with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, northern India, for a special invitation-only dialogue about the future of humanity and the planet. This special radio series presents the essential wisdom to emerge from this historic meeting, the Synthesis Dialogues. Its purpose is to evolve awareness of the interdependent and essentially spiritual nature of understanding in all areas of human life, and to encourage the emergence of knowledge of the value and function of synthesis within individuals from all areas of every society, especially the domain of practical, compassionate service.
I think one of the things that we are hearing
on this first day of the rest of our lives, it behooves us to look up and sweep the horizon with our vision. What we see may be surprising, provocative, and inspiring as we accompany our visionary guide, Harlan Cleveland, whose remarkable life and career has spanned the last 60 years of the 20th century in preparation for the 21st. In service to 4 presidents, former Assistant Secretary of State, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, President of the University of Hawaii, founding Dean of the University of Minnesota's Hubert H. Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs, and author of numerous books, including The Knowledge Executive, Harlan Cleveland is the ideal companion to help us understand the past that has created our present and is forming our future. We're pleased to present the series Before and Beyond 2000, Roots of the Global Century with Harlan Cleveland.
So I believe that we're in the middle of the dawn of a kind of global civil society.
Hello, I'm Michael Toms. With this program, we begin our 13-part exploration of the wisdom of Joseph Campbell. Of the thousands of hours of conversations New Dimensions Radio has recorded over the years, none were more engaging or fruitful than the hours I spent with Joseph Campbell. And in this series, you'll hear why. Joseph, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. As always, pleasure to be with you.
It's good to be with you as well. Joseph, in the introduction, I referred to the darkest places in the forest of society. And perhaps a good place to start is to recall that those dark places have always been with us down through recorded history, haven't they?
They have indeed. And those are what are symbolized, actually, in the Forest Adventurers of the Grail. And there's a wonderful statement in The Quest of the St. Graal. That's the version of the romance in which Galahad figures. The knights are challenged by Gawain to go in quest of the Grail, to behold it unveiled. And the text says they decided to do so. But they thought it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group. Each entered the forest at a place that he had chosen, where it was darkest and there was no way or path. As to say, each must find his own path.
Welcome to New Dimensions. My name is Michael Toms, and I'm going to be your host. Today we have a distinct pleasure. We're going to be talking with R. Buckminster Fuller, affectionately known as Bucky. You're someone who has said over many years that we do have enough to go around. I'd like you to talk about that. Why do we have enough to go around, and what is the real problem that we're facing?
Well, number one is the lack of knowledge of humanity in general, of how we ever came to the conception there was not enough to go around.
By the time people listen to this, I bet they will not remember who Ross Perot was, huh?
I hope not.
Yeah, I call him Ross Pierogi. A little bit of ham surrounded by a whole lot of dough.
Well, we got the laugh track going for that one.
Oh, I see you took a good laugh at this morning.
Yeah, I took it this morning for this program. I had to get ready for it, you know. Interviewers have to do these strange trainings themselves, you know.
When Michael laughed, he really laughed wholeheartedly. By the way, the audio montage was produced by Jeff Westman, is that correct? And prepared for airing here by Dan Duration. Our first speaker today is Charles Tart. An accomplished scientist, he pioneered the field of parapsychology research, and in his many books and numerous New Dimensions interviews, he demonstrated a rare combination of erudition, empathy, and vision. He's also a warm and funny guy. I remember that every time he came to the New Dimensions studio for an interview, he would pretend he was going to bang on the microphones. Did that just for me. It was Charlie who observed at a 1973 conference that the mass media were not reporting on the consciousness revolution at the time, adding, "Someone should do that." His observation helped provide the impetus for Michael and Justine to found New Dimensions. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Tart.
I didn't know I was funny, but that's all right. When I was thinking about what could I say about Michael when there's so many things I could say, I thought there was one point that was essential for me and that really brought home something of the essence of Michael. Okay? I think of myself as a smart person. I've got a lot of learning, I know a lot of facts and all that sort of thing, but not profound, you know, especially in California where everybody's a spiritual leader. And yet, several times Michael would interview me for a New Dimensions program, and at the end I'd think, gosh, I sounded wise. What did he do to make me sound like I really knew what I was talking about? You know, and I can partly say it's because he knew the things he was talking about so well, but there was a quality of Michael that brought out the best in people, and that's really important. Now, that's all I was going to say, but then the universe said, we got some more plans. You just heard that my wife and I met Michael and Justine through a conference in 1973, which was very much a parapsychology conference. And parapsychological stuff has been one of my main interests because it's part of building some bridges between science and spirituality. And then this morning I suddenly thought, I know what I really need to talk about. It's a letter I wrote to Michael when it was clear that he was going, but it was difficult to talk about him, okay? You've probably all been in this situation. You have a friend who's dying, and you go and visit, and what do you say? Do you say, hey, you got your will ready? And, you know, I visited Michael several times and, you know, sort of given little openings in case he wanted to. We were both students of Sogyal Rinpoche, whose Tibetan teachings are very much about death and dying. But it was clear he didn't particularly want to talk about it any of these times. Maybe he was a little confused from the drugs. Maybe he just wanted to avoid it. I certainly like to avoid things when I don't know how to cope with them very well. So finally, I wasn't sure whether we'd be able to see Michael while he was still alive, so I said, I'm going to put my thoughts together in a letter to give to Justine, and she can read it to him when he's ready to listen to it. And if it's embarrassing or too much, I won't be there to feel embarrassed or too much, and Michael can tell her to stop. So I'm going to give you a few excerpts from that letter because it really came from my heart and said some things to Michael that could be said to everybody in a way. So it was, Dear Michael, from what Justine tells me about your condition and intentions, he had indicated he didn't want endless resuscitation by then. I don't know whether we're going to see you first in this world or the next. So before the rush of my life carries me away, I want to express my enormous appreciation and friendship. I wish I had the skill to do it in a way that was helpful to you no matter what circumstances are or will be, but I'm not that good and can only write from my heart. I don't know if you're going to want more company or whether that's too much a drain on energy, so I'll just send you this letter and my love while I can. We haven't had the time to become bosom buddies, but we're both serious friends and companions on the path, and perhaps it's time that we had something of a serious talk about dying and beyond. If it's not the right time, just put this aside for now. From what Justine has written us, you've decided it's time to move on. Wonderful euphemism, move on. But very accurate in another way. I can fully understand the metaphor of moving on rather than just ending or just dying. So here's the essence of what I can share with you from what little scientific research there is. right? I happen to be a world expert on scientific research on the question of survival after death, which sounds very impressive till you realize there's hardly been any research at all. But meanwhile, I mean, why should we try to research one of the most important things in life? It's a funny world. So I gave Michael this quick summary of what I could say with some authority as someone who's looked at this scientifically as well as personally. A century ago, modern spiritualism came along, and it had an incredible idea. It said you didn't need to have blind faith that we're spiritual beings and that we and our loved ones survive death. You could go to special people who acted as mediums, as channels, as it were, apparently contact deceased spirits and test them. Find out if they could give you the kind of information that they should be able to if they really are surviving. You could get, instead of just blind belief, you could get evidence, you could get data on what you wanted to think about this. A very appealing idea to us moderns. Well, like anything with so much emotional charge, our feelings often got in the way of being sensible about this and weighing this evidence. And you have hyper-skeptics who could look at the most amazing mediumistic information in the world and say, yeah, lots of people have uncles named Bill who worked for Tesco who left them surprised, you know. And on the other hand, you could get very upset people who would believe anything that a medium said, even though from an outside perspective it was so vague and didn't really seem to mean anything in particular. But in this spectrum of evidence collected over more than a century, there are some very good cases of mediums apparently contacting deceased people. Like you could get a person who's never gone to a medium before, go to one to contact a certain spirit, and as they walk in the door, that the medium, supposedly channeling the spirit, will say something like, "Hey, Wilhelmina, how are you? Where have you been? Did you and Theodore ever get married like you planned to, or was that too rough?" And it's all correct. That's starting to get pretty specific. Or there was recently a fabulous reincarnation case of a little boy who started having nightmares. The name of the book just slipped out of my mind. But he started having memories come up. And one time his mother was walking him beside a toy shop window downtown and noticed some model airplanes in the window and knew he loved airplanes. So she pointed at one of them and said, "Look, look at that airplane. It's a bomber. It's got a bomb underneath it." And her little 4-year-old said, "No, Mama, that's a drop tank, not a bomb." How many 4-year-olds know about drop tanks used in the Second World War to increase planes' range? There's some very impressive stuff like that. Or he eventually remembered that he had been stationed on an aircraft carrier in the Second World War, and he gave the name of the carrier as the Natoma Bay. And I thought, what? Natoma? That's not an American word. This is some kind of fantasy. Except when they researched it, there was a carrier named the Natoma Bay. There's some very good stuff like this. So if I had to say my overall scientific understanding of might we survive, I'd say it would be kind of pushy for anybody to say survival of some sort is proven beyond any reasonable doubt. But on the other hand, I'd say anybody who says there's no evidence that we don't survive death in some form is just ignorant. They don't know about this kind of evidence. Now, I wish I could have further helped Michael, or anybody for that matter, by being a person who's had great mystical insights and knows from direct contact with the other side what it's like to reassure people, and I'm not. But I know the literature about near-death experiences, of which there are now probably at least 8 million people in the United States who've had near-death experiences, thanks to resuscitation technology. The overall picture they give from almost dying, and I don't recommend anybody try it, the near part in near-death experiences is tricky. It's a wonderful experience. You're met by a warm, loving spirit on the other side, except for very, very few people. Actually, this upsets traditionally religious people because a lot of these near-death experiencers are clearly sinners and they should have had a hard time on the other side. But I've summed it all up in terms of what I think personally, in that I think after I die that at some point I'll regain consciousness. And I put quotation marks around the I. Because I think that while I'll be me in many ways, I think that's slowly and steadily going to change without an earthly life and the input from the body and so forth. So it may not be I that survives after a while. Whatever the case, I'm sure that the life you bring into this transition, to this going to the other side, has a big effect on what happens there. And Michael and Justine have worked up such incredible karma, good karma, telling the world about all these exciting developments, that it's got to be good. I suspect that someday when I die, I'll find Michael waiting on the other side, and after he gives me a big hug, he'll say, "Okay, come on to the studio now, Charlie. I've got you set up for an interview here. And you have to wear this telepathy-enhancing headset so we can get a larger audience than we might normally get." He was a great man. Justine's a great woman, and it's amazing that it's going to go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Our next speaker is Stephen Hill. He's the host of the seminal radio program Hearts of Space, which is also celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and has produced and aired 1,000 programs with elegance, grace, and spaciousness. In 1973, Stephen, who was working as an engineer at public station KQED-FM here in San Francisco, invited Michael to host a radio program on the station, and so we could say that Stephen was the midwife to New Dimensions. Please welcome Stephen Hill.
Seems very strange to be in front of a microphone without earphones on. I'm going to have to get used to that. It was that infamous philosopher of consciousness, Timothy Leary, who said, "It's a genetic intelligence test, and the people who don't move to California flunk." Michael left Virginia and moved to San Francisco in the mid-1960s, so by that logic, he must have been more intelligent than Professor Leary, who was conveyed here and moved into solitary confinement in California in 1973, where he remained after his release from Folsom Prison in 1976, and I think that's approximately when that comment comes from. When Michael arrived here, he moved into San Francisco and lived next door to the historic Matrix nightclub owned by the Jefferson Airplane on Upper Fillmore Street. His timing and choice of location were perfect, and he experienced firsthand the most creative and influential period in San Francisco music and culture. Those were famously heady times, and it's often said that if you remember them, you weren't here. It was a time of big ideas, even fantastic ideas, some of which, in retrospect, were painfully naive. And one of them was both loose and serious talk about changing the world. I met Michael and Justine in this very room in 1973. I had just been lucky enough to acquire a very expensive Swiss portable tape recorder, and I arrived early with my friend Larry Geis, who's here, hoping to record the lecture, only to find that the person who'd been hired to record the lecture had not shown up, so it was a perfect accident, or was it? That meeting led to the creation of New Dimensions Radio, and it's an interesting story. I remember a line from Sipowicz on NYPD Blue: "People and places, the things they do, the times they do them." And that's this kind of story. So KQED Television was founded in 1953, and by the late 1960s, the TV station was pretty well established, and it was expanding. They bought Channel 32, which had a building at 8th and Bryant, and in that extraordinary year of 1969, they also bought a defunct religious FM station and launched KQED Radio. The first manager of KQED Radio was a Cambridge-educated former Anglican priest named Bernard Mays. Look him up on Wikipedia. He's one of the most interesting people you will ever read about. He was an out gay man in the 1950s, and he was a truly progressive educator and broadcaster. In addition to being the founding manager of KQED-FM, he went on to help found a little organization called NPR and was the first chairman of NPR. There wasn't any money for the radio station, so Bernie, who was a clever guy, came up with a format called tribal radio. They sold airtime for $35 an hour, and almost every ethnic group in San Francisco had a show, some of them in Mandarin and other foreign languages. I got here in 1970, and the first thing I did was attend a Bucky Fuller workshop called The World Game, where I met a Harvard-educated disciple of Swami Satchidananda called Scott Anderson. At that time, he was known as Sudarshan. Sudarshan and his friends were doing a program on KQED-FM called Satsang. They were spreading the news about yoga and Indian spirituality. And since I had some radio experience in college, I volunteered to help, and I became their backroom producer. I stayed in the control room, put on records, told the engineer what to do. As a result of doing that, I met Bernie Mays. Bernie knew an overqualified person when he saw one, so he offered me a job as a board operator, and I became the 5th employee of KQED-FM. After about 6 months, Bernie got some more money, and they expanded the broadcast day from 12 to 16 hours. And Bernie called me into his office and said, "Stephen, we have some extra time on Saturday night. Would you like to do something?" And I said, "Sure, Bernie." He said, "Okay, you've got 3 hours." So I did what anybody in San Francisco would do at the time. I invited my friends, and we started several programs. The satsang program that Swami Satchidananda's people were doing lasted about a year, and they basically ran out of things to say about Swami Satchidananda. So Sudarshan, who was a very public-spirited guy, said, "Let's do a program that's more ecumenical. Let's share the microphone here." So he created a program called Meeting of the Ways, which was a platform for that. And he turned the hosting of it over to the late Will Nofke, who was the biggest fan that show ever had. Once again, I became the guy in the control room. Meeting of the Ways highlighted a different tradition every week: Indian, Buddhist, Sufi, Sikh, and a very rich assortment, as you might imagine, of freelancers. Thankfully, Jim Jones was not one of them. Yeah. In 1973, a half an hour opened up on Saturday night on KQED-FM because the Finnish Cultural Hour threw in the towel. And I asked Michael if New Dimensions would be interested in this half hour of airtime. Michael got that twinkle in his eye that Phil mentioned and said, "Of course." And that was the beginning of New Dimensions Radio. Since I was already in the control room working on Meeting of the Ways, I became the first engineer and music producer of New Dimensions Radio. The program was an immediate success, and as everyone now realizes, the early guest list reads like who's who of the builders of the consciousness and new spirituality movements in this country. In my view, the high mission of a broadcaster is to be a conduit for the finer energies of humanity. As broadcasters, we leave behind us a trail of information, experiences, and impressions. And when the stars and planets align perfectly, as they did in San Francisco in those days, some of them have the power to transform the lives of the people who hear them. As an interviewer, Michael was a master of what we call deep listening. Not just the words, but the principles behind the words, and the personalities behind the principles. Ram Dass used to tell a story about a two-word teaching that he received from his master, Neem Karoli Baba, which was, feed people. That's what Michael did with his life. That's the ongoing mission of both New Dimensions and Hearts of Space. We do it with tones that move people. Michael did it with words that have the power to transform people. He was right. It will take a change of consciousness for the world to be transformed. But after 40 years of heroic, single-minded effort, there's still much about the world that needs transformation. That's the work that many of you here today do. That's the work that many who come after us will do. Michael fed millions of people, created a historic archive, and set a very good example. And for that, we're all in his debt. Thank you.
Ever the radio professional, Stephen took the perfect amount of time. Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker is Patricia's son. Michael used to like to tell the story of how Patricia first came to appear on New Dimensions. It seems that not long after the series began airing, one of the people involved in creating the program, I believe it was Elmer Brunsman, came to a meeting talking about a woman in Berkeley named Patricia Sun, and saying that she had to be invited to appear on the program. She makes these sounds, he said. At this point in the story, Michael would always say, so we said, she makes sounds? Well, she did, and they defied description, even for those of us who've been fortunate enough to hear them. But the New Dimensions crew was savvy enough to invite her on, and those who were present or who tuned into that first interview maintained that the program really took off when she came on. She's since returned many, many times on the radio and at live events, and has always had a special place in the roster of New Dimensions guests. As Michael said at 3 Jewels in the Lotus, it's my pleasure, it's my privilege, it's my honor to introduce Patricia's son.
Well, the first thing, I did write a eulogy for Michael, and I have never spoken in public from something written. And I might not today either. But the thing that I want to talk about Michael was the essence of what I still feel present in this room, the essence of what Michael did and who he was and what his soul was. I felt it the very first time. It was in the early 70s, and they were doing a show about 4 hours long on KQED on healing, which is, of course, something I'm very interested in. And they didn't really know who I was. And they had many people come, and I had come early, and I sat, and I saw people come in, be on, and leave, and be on, and be leave. And I did not mind. I thought, oh, this is what nice, interesting people he has coming on. So it got to be almost midnight, and the show was just, there was the last part of it. And I came in, and the first thing I felt when I saw Michael was, oh my goodness, he's here. He knows what we're here to do. And I don't want to make it too wordy to describe it, because it was really a feeling. You know those feelings you get with certain people in life? You just know them, you like them, you trust them, you know they're there, they're home. And I felt that way about Michael, and I just followed whatever happened, and we talked. And then he said, I hear you make sounds. Now, it's very interesting. I do make healing sounds, and I only once in my life have made them on the air, and that was with Michael. And it was that night. And it was a very interesting experience, because for me the sounds were kind of sacred. They opened something kind of to have reverence for. I didn't feel like I was performing or anything. And but with Michael, the very character he had through the whole 40 years of broadcasting, which in my estimation makes him far and away the most significant broadcaster of our century, without exception, because his soul was very focused on supporting us all in our nascent awareness of the new dimensions that many of us know are here and trying to be understood and felt by us all. He supported that with an unflinching, laser-like internal focus, whether it was humor or it was serious or different people from different viewpoints. It sort of didn't matter. He always made everyone, I liked what Charles said about the best. You came out your best, because he used that laser intelligence in a very humble way and gentle way to draw out what you really wanted to tell people. And so that night, when I came and we talked, and I just thought, oh, thank goodness, somebody really good is going to help all this happen. He asked, Patricia, would you make the sounds? And I said, okay. It didn't even give a second thought. And the interesting thing was the room. Everybody sort of spontaneously got up, held hands, and made the sounds, and everybody closed their eyes. It was like a transcendent thing happened. And I've never had that caliber of authentic receptivity to ever do it on the air again. And so I always did it at the end of workshops. And I think I will do maybe 3 sounds just for us, because I believe Michael's right here. The day that he died, I woke up very early, and I had a feeling about him. And I couldn't think a light went out of the world, because I feel his light is completely here, and unencumbered by many of the physical difficulties that all human beings have coming into the physical body. He's present, he's here, and I think probably almost all of us can feel that. And what I thought was that the harbinger of this next level of thinking that's being born through the whole of humanity, Michael had a soul dedication to facilitating it in the most simultaneously normal way of an interview, but simultaneously drawing out the very essential ingredients of experience, more than even information, of experience that people needed to evolve themselves. And you can't do a higher service in broadcasting than that. You cannot have a higher soul focus, I don't think, on the planet, than to be genuinely focused and concerned through everything you do, no matter what your personality is, whatever stuff you got going on in life. It still was like a laser focus of his soul, which to me is, it is a saintly state, that focus. And my maiden name was Riley, and Michael is Irish, and I'm Irish. And I remember this phrase as a book by a wonderful Irishman, John Donohoe, I think his name is, and it's called Anam Cara. And Anam Cara is Irish for soul friend. And I think we were all blessed to have a soul friend like Michael. And that's what I thought I felt immediately when I saw him. One time when we were on the air, he gave, we were talking and it was moving very positively. Everybody was calling and saying, "Oh, it's so great, Michael, what you say and what you say, Patricia. Oh, it's so wonderful." And when we took a little pause, I said, "Michael, we have to get somebody to call us who doesn't think we're so great. We need to get somebody who's going to complain a little so we can, rise to it and say something more than just, oh, we all agree." So the next call came, and this man says, "I don't know about you two, you're just so optimistic." And that's what Michael did. He burst out laughing. And, we couldn't, he said, "Oh, so I should be sad and not optimistic?" And we did patiently try to explain that it's a powerful state of mind to optimize your thought, to optimize possibility, to optimize thinking. And so I just always felt that Michael, was a special soul. He was not the normal person. And especially his focus. I can't tell you too many funny stories about Michael because we're both kind of serious people. And we both had a very serious focus all the time. And I felt comfortable with that with him, and I think he felt comfortable with me on that, and there was a tremendous amount of respect because of that. But I do feel the most important thing to say right now is that he is present, he is here, he doesn't have encumbrance of body and worry about delivering things and raising money and making things work. And I do believe he could not help but know in his soul what a magnificent job he did. To me, it's awesome. And I don't rave about people much. And I don't make grandiose statements because they might sound good. Michael was really extraordinary. And his caring that we would all, bar none, on this planet be supported by the best minds he could find, interviewing them with the most open-hearted way he could with using all his intelligence. He focused it all the time. I just never got over how purely he did that. And there could be problems in the studio. He could be upset about something else. Didn't matter. As soon as came right back to the focus. And that's a holy thing. I think that's a holy thing. And so I guess I asked Michael last night, tell me anything you want me to say. And I think the only thing that I feel like he would like us to say is don't forget where we're going. Don't forget what we're doing. And don't forget, he's still here. He's still with you at his highest soul way beyond his personality now. And you can tap into that, and he still is serving. He's still serving. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And even though I feel a lot of tears from the physical side of being human and feeling loss, I feel very joyful at how he feels to me now. So, Michael, we love you. Thank you so much. And I think what I'll do is just make a few sounds, like in closing, to say that frequency And those sounds, oh dear, they kind of bring you to the place, I think, where he is. They take you to another state of mind that happens to be very healing to the body, because it helps the two hemispheres of the brain not fight each other and relax and work together. So it's a healing frequency. But I do think it is a frequency that gives us access to other dimensions. And new dimensions are what the evolutionary leap we're all involved with is starting to create. And I mean, even the unfailing perfectness of new dimensions as the name, at a time when that wasn't really as powerfully and meaningful, I think, as it is now, that there really are new dimensions that we are all becoming physically able to encompass and perceive. So what I'll do is just make a few sounds. It helps to breathe, helps to close your eyes, you don't have to. And I'll just make 3 so I won't take too much time. And I'll just leave one moment after I do that to say a few words in closing, and then I will be finished. So just remember to breathe. The presence of God vibrates within us all, forever and in every way. And it radiates from us, as us. And so gently being aware of the room, the light, the energy, the frequencies, the goodness, the beauty of your own heart and soul as we reach that level that touches where Michael is now. Very gently allow yourself to open your eyes, be here, feel the presence of the room, feel your higher self fully within yourself, and know that it's always yours at any time, as is speaking to Michael, available to you any time. Don't underestimate that. That wisdom, that power, that soft dedication is present, and it's here, and it's still for us. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. We're going to go from one kind of healing sound to another. Our next presenter is not a speaker, but a Grammy-nominated musician. Stephen Halpern helped create the New Age music genre in 1975, and since then has produced more than 70 albums that have expanded our understanding of the use of music and sound for healing. And Stephen's now going to offer a musical interlude to help us reflect, remember, and center ourselves before we continue our celebration of Michael's life. Please welcome Stephen Halpern.
take a deep breath. Allow yourself to just come into the moment with the sound and the power of the present.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker is Dorothy Fadiman. Dorothy's a passionate advocate for social justice and human rights and the award-winning creator of more than 20 films. She became a filmmaker by first listening to her inner voice and then learning how to give form to her vision. And over the years, she's appeared on New Dimensions many times, talking about those themes and much more. One of her earliest appearances on the program was devoted to her articulating her experience of light, which seems perfectly appropriate for a filmmaker, but a daunting challenge for a radio program. And yet, with her eloquence and radiant energy, she pulled it off. Please join me in welcoming Dorothy Fanman.
I'd like to pick up on Charlie Tart's comment about feeling profound after Michael has interviewed you. And I'd like to read and speak from something I wrote to Michael when I heard he was in hospice. And it's from the point of view of someone who's been interviewed by Michael. I want to say thank you for what you and Justine have given us, those of us who've had the privilege of being interviewed by you, and then expressing thanks beyond measure for what you've given the communities you then reach. Being interviewed on New Dimensions by you has been and is a golden opportunity. Now, as I was writing this, I was aware of the paradoxes, and I may repeat a few things because that was the exquisite beauty of Michael's gift. Your gentle and at the same time urgent way of asking questions. Gentle but urgent. Your loving but firm insistence on the truth, to the extent that we are able to tell it. That was the thing. He never demanded, ever, that you tell him the truth. But he coaxed the truth out of you in such a way that he made it safe to tell the truth. Your understated challenges to our assumptions, seductively urging us. And everyone who's been interviewed by him knows exactly what I'm saying, to go deeper and deeper and further. The elegant subtlety with which you dared us to go past wherever we started at an interview. And then together, we ended up climbing a spiral staircase leading to a greater truth. I went through that. I interviewed by him, 8, 10 times. Every single time I came in knowing what I wanted to say and thought I was what I wanted to share with all of you in the world. And Michael would coax out of me, and together we would go to a whole new level every single time. And I speak from experience, so I'm going to give a few examples. I didn't realize I had a voice until both of you and Justine, invited me to speak up and speak out. I didn't realize my power as a woman. Now, Michael was not particularly sexual during the interviews, though he was very seductive. And so he would coax out of a woman, and as a woman I can only speak as a woman, a level of intimate conversation that usually happens in the bedroom. When he treated the interview like a kind of making love. And every single time I reached a climax. And as a result of that first opportunity of and it was Justine who actually first invited me to speak, I've gone on to make 25 films using that same voice that Michael Toms coaxed out of me long before I even imagined making a film. One of your great skills, Michael, has been bringing out the best in all of us. And then there was the gift of you and Justine inviting me to talk about and give my inner voice. First it was learning how to talk about light like this, then it was coaxing out and finding that inner voice. And you, Michael, listening to your own inner voice, made it a conversation. And that was the gift of gifts. You'd go in, and each time you kind of forgot how amazing he was, expecting to be interviewed. And he always turned it into a conversation, a kind of making love on air. And that's why your shows were so popular, is people felt they were invited into a very intimate experience. And they were and are. The way you turn an interview into a conversation is exquisite. And Michael and Justine had a very close, intense primary relationship. And they invited me to talk about my open marriage with Jim. And before that opportunity, I kind of went back and forth between bragging that we have this amazing open marriage and hiding and pretending we were normal like everybody else. But what Michael did is he made it seem like a natural thing. If you loved someone and you listened to each other and you've got a sense of what each other needed and wanted, you can build a primary relationship that way. So he had a huge positive impact on my open marriage by making it seem natural. And that was one of his great gifts. He made the extraordinary seem natural. One of the most interesting times, and this will be the last story I'll tell because I know we're short on time, but Justine and Michael invited me to talk about how the poetry of Rumi had melted my heart and opened my mind and so on. All those amazing things those of you who know the poetry of Rumi have experienced. And I went on once and it was incredible, very powerful. And they invited me back soon again. And I got on the freeway and I was driving along and I forgot the book. And I'd only memorized a few of the poems and I thought, oh God, I either have to be late, and I'm one of those people that hates to be late, or I have to wing it. So I arrived in the studio, and Justine handed me a brown paper package. And she said, this arrived for you in the mail today. I opened it, and it was the book from which I was going to have read, Open Secret. Coleman Barks in Georgia had heard the New Dimensions radio show on air. And he said, I want that woman to have a copy of my book autographed by me. And so, what, dear? And so that day, I read from the book that Coleman had sent me because I'd left my book at home. And that really is the essence of New Dimensions. And I'm going to go back now to what I was going to have started with, but I am going to end with that, which is the gifts from New Dimensions, the shows, the cassettes that go out on our computers, the CDs, the numbers you reach and the impact you have are beyond calculation. What your work has provided and continues to provide reaches well beyond any form of counting. And the essence of all these gifts, of each person that you, Michael, and this was from what I wrote to him, have interviewed, is that you make it safe to admit to ourselves and to tell the world that we really are divine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Our next speaker is Ralph Metzner. I think of Ralph as someone who was present at the creation, that is, the creation of the psychedelic movement. As a grad student, he worked with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert on the Harvard Psilocybin Project, and since then he's written groundbreaking books mapping the landscape of consciousness. Ralph has appeared many times on New Dimensions, but was also present at another Genesis moment, the planting of the seed that became New Dimensions Foundation. It was after Michael and Justine experienced a guided meditation led by Ralph at the conference in Berkeley, the same one where Charlie Tart made his observation, that they decided to start New Dimensions. So please join me in welcoming Ralph Metzner. Good to see you again, Ralph.
So, I'm very honored and happy to be able to say something about the many faces, the many aspects, the many roles that Michael has played in all of our lives. Primary among the one that we all know is the really gifted interviewer, his easygoing acceptance and welcoming, and his ability to elicit insights and perspectives from people. And just recently, actually, I was re-listening to a tape, and that's one thing I really appreciate about the whole work that New Dimensions has done with Justine and is continuing, that this work, 30 years of interviews, exists. They exist in this, his disembodied voice exists and can be listened to forever. You know? So I was listening to his interviews with David Bohm, which are just phenomenal. And somehow in the conversation, Michael elicits from David this ability to explain these complex and sophisticated ideas in physics, which I really appreciate. And his interviews with Buckminster Fuller, too, are just outstanding. And I anticipate I'll go back to many of these tapes and interviews again and again. I first encountered Michael in I was going to say the late 60s, but the time shifts, so I think it was in the early 70s, actually, when he invited me to be connected with New Dimensions. But see, the time was a time. There was New Age, New Dimensions, and it's fashionable nowadays to kind of poke fun at the New Age. People think, New Age, blah, 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 not forgetting that it was not just about expanding consciousness or pursuing tarot cards or astrology or anything like that. There was multiple movements of consciousness transformation and social transformation going on. An anti-war movement, a civil rights movement, a women's liberation movement, a cultural renaissance in many, many areas. I think of Michael as a kind of a midwife. Midwifing, giving a voice to people whose voice are opening up new possibilities. And when we connected, I was connected with CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies. I was the academic dean there, and we were just in this phase of trying to find out who we were. Haridas Chowdhury had died, the founder, and we were kind of floundering. We were middle of having accreditation. And Michael taught a course on public relations, which I took. Because being an academic, like other academic psychologists, I knew nothing about public relations. Here I was supposed to be a dean, and being in the interface between an academic institution and the public. I was a professor, for Pete's sake. So he taught a course in public relations, how to design brochures, and I took it. It was great. I really learned a lot, and I put it into practice. Remembering too, this is before the digital age. This is before, the internet. This is before www. This is how to do about print and how you do layout and typography and presentation, that kind of stuff. It was very wonderful. It was like really, I'll always appreciate it and always have. And it seems like that's his specialty, like he enabled people who have great ideas and great thoughts and interesting thoughts and contributions to make, and then how to bring that to a larger public relations. How many people think that, would have come into contact in that kind of deep way with the ideas of people like David Bohm? And then So then, through CIS, I don't know how many of you know this story, because CIS, where I was the dean, there was after Haridas Chaudhry had died, and there was the founder of it, and there was a brief period when Frederick Spiegelberg, who was a Sanskrit professor at Stanford, was the president, but he didn't want to be a president, he was a professor. And so we needed a new president because we were just about to get accredited, and you have to have a president if you're going to get accredited. And so we hired a gentleman from Texas, and whose name I won't mention out of respect for. But his idea of being a president was to sit around and issue commands every now and again to people, and it was basically going downhill from that. And so he was let go, and then there was a period, because we're going into accreditation, and you have to have a leadership thing. So we had a leadership team while searching for a new president that consisted of Beena Chaudhry, the widow of the founder, Haridas Chaudhry, and myself, and Michael Toms, who was by then had assumed, I think, the chairmanship of the board. So we were the triumvirate, trying to, for about a year, I think, trying to kind of negotiate until a new president, John Broomfield, was hired. And that was a very interesting experience. I really enjoyed working with Michael in that different kind of role. He was like an interviewer, very easygoing, embracing, encompassing, but focused at the same time. He had zero ambition himself, as far as I could read, to be the president. As soon as the new president was found, he retired from that role. His gift was getting people to work together and think together. And one of the things that he initiated, which I thought was really cool, was the idea of, well, every year we have this, graduation of the people getting their degrees. So he initiated the idea, well, why don't we give an honorary degree? And I thought, wow, what a concept. He said, let's give an honorary degree to Joseph Campbell. I thought, wow, how cool is that? Yeah, we could do that. Now we're an accredited institution. So we got to invite Joseph Campbell. I got to meet Joseph Campbell and have dinner with him and introduce him at a lecture. He gave a fantastic talk. And so that became an annual tradition at the graduation ceremony. You invite somebody. Then later on, we invited Arthur Young, the wonderful inventor, philosopher, whom I really love a lot, and his work. And so in all these ways, I just want to say to Michael, thank you for all your contributions to our lives and our times.
Thank you, Ralph. Our next speaker is James Fadiman. Jim is a psychologist, the co-founder of Sophia University, which is formerly known as the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, and the author or co-author of many books exploring consciousness and spirituality, including a series of heartwarming, entertaining, and profound books presenting the Sufi wisdom of Nasruddin. Jim is also known for his keen insight and engaging humor, as New Dimensions listeners have found many times over the years. Please join me in welcoming James Fadiman.
He's somewhere. But then again, as Charlie said, we're not sure. And one of the things I've learned from Charlie is that real science is finding out what you don't know. Publishing is repeating what someone else knows. So I checked. Michael, are you here? He says, no, I'm not. But I'm not fooled because I know that voice. Yes, I did count the house, Michael. It's good. Few places open at the back, but we're doing fine. We've all talked about our relationship with Michael, those of us who've been standing here, but in the best tradition of what we satirize as New Age, can you just take a moment and turn to someone, hopefully, that you don't know, and tell them for just a minute or so about your relationship with Michael? And if it's very tenuous, then be tenuous for a minute. I'm very unsure how really to deal with memorial services. But one of the things that I have heard that makes sense to me is something that the Irish call keening. And keening is the making of sounds. And it's not to keep the departed with us, but it's to allow them an easier out. It has been called Irish wailing. And there are actually people who go to funerals just to do it. They're not here. But it would seem to me appropriate, particularly, as Michael would notice, when you have a room with great acoustics, you got to use it in some way. And in my notes, it says, let's all wish him a safe landing and the best Bardo crossing possible. So let's, I think Patricia kind of suggests how wonderful a sound you can make, but we're all capable of making a sound. And let's take a couple of breaths worth of whatever our sound is that is wishing Michael the best Bardo crossing possible. Which I did not bring. But it starts with, don't grieve, because I am not gone. And then it points out that I'm in the sunlight, and I'm in the water. And I'm especially in the love hearts of everyone I've touched. Now, when you think about Michael, that's a lot of hearts. And not only that, but 3,000 copies of them are at Stanford. It's really quite extraordinary when you think of that number of everyone almost any of us have ever been interested in. And as someone pointed out, and as we heard with that wonderful montage, is the disembodied voice lasts forever. It's rather cheering. I made a note to tell Dorothy that should I precede her, a few recordings would be really nice. And fortunately, we know where we can get some. I was at a Buddhist service many years ago for someone named Rob Christ. And Rob Christ was a kind of combination of the worst of John Lilly and the worst of Ken Kesey. And he died a particularly stupid death. And we were all just pissed off at him. But there was a memorial service. And it was a Buddhist service. And they put up a big picture. And what people were urged to do is to finish your conversation and say that which you hadn't yet been able to say. And a lot of people went up and railed at him and then cried. Some people just went and told him they loved him and they cried. And it felt like an understanding that the purpose of a memorial service is for us. It's our chance to make that completion. And the question then is there anything you'd like to say just to Michael, just inside yourself? And something I do when people die, because usually they die and I'm not around. And I usually go out into nature and just talk to them. Because as you know, when you go out into nature, it's full of spirits. Driving into San Francisco and I got us lost, I'm not as convinced that there are as many spirits that can handle it here. So I go into nature. But again, I'd like to ask you then, just for a minute or so of quiet, close your eyes and evoke that you're speaking to Michael, and just say what you need to say. And if you don't finish, sometime the next day or so, go out into nature and finish the talk. He's very interested when people talk to him. Again, let me interrupt you. And let me thank you for being part of this matrix that supported Michael and Justine as they have supported all of us. And that they didn't do it for us and we didn't do it for them. Because there really isn't an us and a them. But there are some specialized organs, and Michael and Justine were that, and gave us all, many of us here that I know, an opportunity, as Dorothy said, to discover our own voices. And the best way to honor Michael and Justine is to continue to give voice to the consciousness that is our really only hope for saving and improving and having a civilization that's worth talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our final speaker today is someone we've all been waiting eagerly to hear from, Justine Toms. We all know that New Dimensions came into being because Michael and Justine came together in a particular time and place and under particular circumstances. But what many faithful New Dimensions listeners of long standing may not know is that over the past 40 years, the program has been sustained in large measure by Justine's determination, her willingness to acquire new skills, take on new roles, operate outside her comfort zone, and in the end, see it all as just part of her journey. Soon after Michael passed, a couple dozen current and former members of the New Dimensions family gathered at the home of Stephen and Layla Hill to reminisce and support each other and begin to envision not just this memorial service, but also the road ahead. And at that gathering, Justine expressed her absolute commitment to continuing the work that she and Michael began 40 years ago. And those were welcome words indeed. To honor the spirit of her life partner, Michael, and the brilliant vehicle for transformation they created together, please welcome Justine WIllis Toms.
I'm so moved. Thank you, everyone who has spoken. You've just touched my heart so deeply. It's hard for me to keep the tears back because you've really connected with my heart and the heart of Michael and the heart of our work. Thank you so much. I moved somehow to say a dream that I had. Some of you have heard me tell this dream that I had just this week about this gathering. And I dreamed that I was too ill to come, so I didn't show up. But Michael came. And afterwards I asked him, I said, I wanted a report, how did it go? How many people showed up? He said, well, 25 people showed up. And he said, it went really well. However, I think it might have been better if we had had it after I died. So I'm not sure, maybe some of you psychologists would know what that means, and you can figure that out for me. Have I not accepted what's the reality, or is it true? He really is here, I'm sure in some way. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I also I can't proceed without thanking some people who made this whole gathering happen. It just has not been just the efforts of one person. And, Stephen, thank you so much, Stephen Halpern, for the music. You don't know, but in Michael's last days, the only music CDs that he had by his bed were Stephen Halpern's. A whole stack of Stephen's music, and that's what he was using there in those last days. And I want to thank also Phil as a weaver, Phil Catavo. Perfect job, perfect person. Thank you so much for saying yes to my invitation. Thank you so much. And also for Dan Drayson and Jolene O'Hare. Dan is doing the video so that those who couldn't be present will maybe be able to see this later on. Thank you so much. And Dan is a detail king of New Dimensions and has been for 40 years. Thank you so much, Dan. And he's also, yes. Well deserved. He's also the voice you hear. It's only through a change of consciousness. He's been doing that voice for 40 years in all of its different incarnations. Thank you, Dan. And mostly, Dan has been at my right hand this past year during this tremendous transition of New Dimensions. I just want to say a special thanks. public thanks to you, Dan. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank Jeff Westman for pulling together that montage. He couldn't be with us today, but he was the one who said, oh, remember that time that Michael really lost it and just started laughing and couldn't grab it again? And after that joke that Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman, told. And it just, I just was so glad to be reminded of that, and he found that in the archive. And isn't it so great to have people who have such great history with you? You know, they know these things, and they help you remember things, and it's just the best of life to have companions like that. And I want to thank Giovanna Perrine and her sister Norma and Christina Fleming and all the others who are helping and have helped to put together the little reception afterwards. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And to Susanna Gratz and to Linda Phillips Blue of Clarity Web Studio. She and Susanna have really gotten the word out, so thank you so much. So I just wanted to make sure that I do those thank yous for people, because it is a group effort. And then I want to say something about the gift that Michael has given to me. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. And some of the speakers have actually even spoken to it. But some of you have heard this story, and some of you that may be new. But it's worth telling again, even if you've heard it, because it's a seminal story for me. It is a transformative moment in my life. So it's still fresh and new and important to me to tell it and to retell it and to remind myself of it. And some of you know that I have an innate what I would call spiritual enthusiasm. And, you know, I grew up Episcopalian, and in fact my family helped to found the local Episcopal church where we lived. But they weren't so devout as I was, and they didn't always go to church, and I would find rides to get me to the church. And I would, you know, even in the snow and the blizzards, I would get there. I'm not so sure. I thought this morning as I was thinking about this, I'm not so sure if it was spiritual enthusiasm or that I just loved to play dress up. Because the Episcopal Church at that time, you were required or recommended to wear hats. So it was, and I loved to play dress up, and so maybe that was it. I don't know. But anyway, I ended up in Alabama, which was kind of a second home for me, and I started exploring becoming a Southern Baptist, and I became a Southern Baptist, and I, you know, sang in the choir. I love the music. Oh, you know, the Episcopals are very staid, but the Baptists are full on, and I love doing that. And then I moved to California, and the natural progression would be, of course, to become a Jehovah's Witness. There's a long story of how I got there, and I won't go into that, but I'll spare you that one. But anyway, then, so for 3 years, you know, again, I put myself fully into whatever it is I'm doing. I knock on doors and, you know, hand out my watchtower, and and many doors slammed in my face. But and then I met Michael. I actually didn't knock on his door, so some people think that maybe that's how we met, but I met through a neighbor. And I was so excited by meeting him, and I knew that I wanted to get to know him better. This was something in my soul was stirred. And so I called him up. We had gone out a couple of times. But I called him up and I said, Michael, we really need to talk about spiritual things. And he thought, okay. So I said, I'm coming over and to talk. So I came over. I didn't know, at that time, but he threw the I Ching. That was his oracle, and he consulted the I Ching to find out how he should handle this, because he was attracted to me, and he knew this was going to be an interesting gathering between the two of us. So we went into his second bedroom. He was living in Sausalito townhouse, and it was floor-to-ceiling books in his library. It was, the Bhagavad Gita, the books on Vedanta, science of mind, integral yoga, Buddhism, Judaism, Taoism. They all were there, the works of the devil. So I said, now look, I don't want to talk about any of that. I want to talk about the Bible. And I want to talk about my translation of the Bible. And because like the New World Translation, some of you won't know, the witnesses are very intellectual in their study of the Bible, and they take everything in the whole chapter, and they go into the history of it, and the context of it, and then they did their own translation from the Greek, which the New Testament is written in Greek, except where they excerpt the Old Testament. But a lot of people don't know that. So I was going to grapple with him about this, and I said, we're going to use my translation. And Michael, unbeknownst to me, had a whole shelf of different translations of the Bible. And he reached back, and I remember just right next to his shoulder, and pulled out that green New World Translation, and he said, "Do you mean this one?" And I remember thinking to myself, maybe he's being more inclusive than me. But my lips were sealed. I didn't say a word. I didn't tell him what I was thinking. And so then we started grappling with this. And Jim Fadiman has really helped me to see this. This is on our 20th anniversary, Jim. When I told this story on our 20th anniversary, you helped me see that the context of this was really the mythological beginning of New Dimensions. This conversation that we had in that little library was the beginning of New Dimensions, in a mythological sense, as Joseph Campbell would say. And so, we started grappling, and I'd say, well, here's a scripture, and here's what it means. And every time I said that, Michael would say, yes, and you might look at it like this. And every time he said that, it's like the landscape just started to extend itself a little more. He never said, no, you're wrong, that's not what it means. He said, no, I hear what you're saying, and you might look at it like this. And, and this was long before we had that technique. It's kind of a technique now, either or both and, that's we're learning that really well now. But this was before we knew about that. He knew about it intuitively. He knew how to do that. And so we spent the entire night, all night long, grappling with Scripture. And I got more and more excited. And just going back to what Dorothy was saying, it was, as Barbara Marx Hubbard would say, it was supra-sex, And what she means by that is that which vitalizes us, that which inspires us to reach into our innate genius for our own evolution. And that's what happened that day. That's what was going on that day, that night. And I never left. That was it. That was 41 years ago. And we that's when it all started. And then later on, as Charlie Tart and Ralph Metzner have alluded to, and Phil has said, we started exploring different avenues, and one time there was an event called Frontiers of Consciousness put on by KPFA in Berkeley at Zellerbach Auditorium, and Charlie was there, and Ralph Metzner was there, and Ralph did, I think it was called a light fire meditation. Is that right? I never, ever experienced a whole, like 1,000 people all at one time amplifying together this guided visualization. It was the most amazing thing to come off of Jehovah's Witness, and then here I am, in this auditorium and experiencing light fire meditation, and then Charlie mentioned, as Phyllis told us, that there's a revolution in consciousness going on, and no one is reporting on it. And that next day at breakfast with a dear friend, Michael was just, really excited about this event that we had just attended. And he said, somebody needs to do something about this. And Jim Hill said, yeah, and why don't you? And Michael said, okay, what should we name it? And we named it right there, New Dimensions. And that was another lesson for me, to see how something can come as a concept in our imagination, and then the very next day Michael went to a lawyer and they drew up incorporation papers for a nonprofit educational organization to see it birthed out in the world right like that. That was amazing to me, that you could do that. And one of the things that we did is that we started a lecture series, the one that Stephen Hills mentioned, right here in this church, 6 weeks. Charlie Tart was there, Brendan O'Regan, a couple of Jesuit priests. Each week we would have a different person. Dr. Haridas Chaudhry was there, and I want to mention that along with Joseph Campbell, Bucky Fuller, Dr. Chaudhry was a tremendous mentor to Michael. He was like a father figure to Michael, and they had many, many, many hours together, and Dr. Chaudhry was on our original board of directors. So it was just very precious for Michael to accept Bina Chaudhry's invitation to be on the board of and run for the board of CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies. So that was a very precious moment. And I just want to say something about Dr. Chaudhry. He was in correspondence with Sri Aurobindo. And of course, Sri Aurobindo had met with Swami Vivekananda. And so Sri Aurobindo was a person who really brought off the dusty shelves of books and the dusty monasteries, this whole the universal spirituality, and he made it available to all of us. He made it like common property. So I just want to give that acknowledgement to Dr. Chaudhry, who Sri Aurobindo had advised and encouraged to come to America. And so many of those gurus that you've all talked about, when they first came here in the early 70s and all through the 70s, they came through Dr. Chaudhry because he was the best known Easterner in the United States and most respected. So those were some of the early influences of New Dimensions. And I want to say that the first book that Michael ever gave me was Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta. which is just like blew my socks off. And we went to the Vedanta temple, and I couldn't believe it. Here at the front of the Vedanta temple here in San Francisco, they have 5 icons. And one is of Jesus, one is of Buddha, one is of Sri Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Sarada Devi. They even include a woman's presence. So again, it was like expanding my horizons really very quickly, dropping me in the deep end of the pool. And I just want to say that what Michael has given me, he believed in me, kind of what you alluded to, Phil. He believed in me. He believed in my potential before I did. He knew something about me. He saw something in me that I could not see in myself. And I think, others have spoken of this. It's true. And it reminds me of an African saying that a true friend is one who remembers your song when you have forgotten it, who remembers your beauty when you feel ugly, and your innocence when you feel guilty, and your wholeness when you feel broken, and your purpose when you feel confused. So with that, I just am so grateful to all the many friends that hold me and remember my song and help to keep me remembering my own song and singing my own song. And I want to close with a part of a poem that I was reminded that Rusty Schweikart, who was the lunar module command pilot for Apollo 9, spoke on New Dimensions. And I thought I had lost this program because I couldn't find it in the database. And I'm so glad that I found it this morning. I just started this morning going through the database, tape, program by program by program to just find it. And I realized we put him in not as Rusty, but as Russell, his real name, not his nickname. So I found it. So I hope that I can find it, and maybe Roberto Trujillo can help me with the archive, which is now situated at Stanford University. Thank you very much. And they're planning to digitize it. Maybe he can help me find that particular program. But it he mentions a poem by E.E. Cummins, and I'll just read one stanza of it. I thank you, God, for this most amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Something that Justine said reminded me that when people asked Michael what his religion was, he would usually say, I'm a Christian existentialist Vedantic Buddhist, which works for me. Well, thank you, Justine, and this concludes our service. I know we all wish Godspeed to Michael's spirit, and we'll continue to share the gifts he's bestowed on us in his time here. Before we leave, I want to acknowledge past members of the New Dimensions family whose contributions were pivotal to the birth, evolution, and growth of this work. Some are here. Some have gone on to that great broadcasting studio in the sky. Others are still with us but could not attend the service today, although they were certainly here in spirit. So thank you, Will Nofke, Byron Hayes, Anna Turner, Tom Greenaway, Ron Ratner, Larry Geis, Stephen Zent, Dan Drayson, Lou Judson, David Hulse-Stevens, Jeff Westman, Neil Harvey, Giovanna Perrine, Beck Kageyama, Jane Heaven, Elmer Brunsman, Bahauddin Alpine, Ray Couture, Phil Eversole, and everyone else who lent a hand any time from 1973 until today. And thanks to all of you for coming. I invite you to join us at a reception in the Star King room, which is just down this hall here. And we'll start in just a few minutes. So until we meet again, and on behalf of the entire New Dimensions Radio family, past, present, and future, I'm wishing you well. Well, cut to station break.
I want to thank you for joining us at the New Dimensions Cafe. My name is Michael Toms. Please come back again. And don't forget, when you go out there in the world, do something good.